She walked into the most dangerous house in Chicago with a single suitcase and absolutely no idea that the two crying children inside were the only witnesses to a murder. A murder committed by the very man who still walked those halls every single day, smiling, pouring wine, calling himself their loving uncle. And the terrifying part? Their own father had no idea. Not even a clue. The man who could make hardened criminals tremble with one look, the man who ran the most feared crime syndicate in the entire city, was completely blind to the monster sleeping under his own roof. And it took a broke, exhausted waitress from the South Side to uncover the truth that was about to blow everything apart. Welcome back to Real Life Echo. If you are new here, this channel is where we bring you the most gripping, emotional and jaw-dropping stories that will have you absolutely glued to your screen. Before we dive into today's story, if you have ever stayed up past midnight watching a video you just could not turn off, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Real Life Echo so you never miss a single story. Ring that notification bell too, because trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now, let us get into this. Sophia Reynolds was 24 years old and she was drowning. Not dramatically, not in any way that anyone around her could easily see, but slowly, quietly, the way debt swallows a person whole when they are too proud to ask for help. Her father Richard had passed away after a long illness, and the medical bills he left behind were staggering. The kind of numbers that make your stomach drop every time you open your mailbox. She had been working double shifts at the Gilded Vine, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, for months. She wore comfortable shoes that were no longer comfortable. She smiled at wealthy patrons who never once looked her in the eyes. She balanced trays of champagne that cost more per glass than she earned in an hour. And every single night, she went home to her late father's small house, sat at the kitchen table, and did the math over and over again, praying somehow the numbers would change. They never did. It was a Tuesday night when everything shifted. The Gilded Vine had a particular kind of energy, the kind that hums quietly under the surface of polished crystal and soft orchestral music. The regulars were there. The politicians, the old money families, the young professionals trying to look like old money. And then the heavy oak doors opened, and the entire room seemed to inhale at once. The maitre d' practically tripped over himself rushing forward. The ambient chatter dropped to a nervous, cautious hum. Matteo Bianca had walked in. Now if you did not know the name Matteo Bianca, you were either brand new to Chicago or you had been living under a very thick rock. He was the head of the Bianca crime family, a syndicate that had its fingers in everything from real estate to the docks to half the city council. He was a man carved from marble and ruthlessness, as one journalist once described him before quietly retracting the article and leaving the country. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like armor. His dark eyes moved across the room the way a predator scans a field, not out of fear but out of absolute habit. For bodyguards flanked him, massive and silent, their eyes never stopping, never settling. But it was not Matteo that made Sophia's breath catch in her throat. It was what he was holding. Or rather, who was holding on to him. Two small children, a boy and a girl no older than 5, were clinging to his sides. They looked terrified. Their little faces were pale, their eyes red from recent crying, their small fingers gripping his jacket as if letting go meant falling into something worse. Sophia recognized immediately that something was very wrong. Not tantrum wrong. Not tired toddler wrong. This was a deeper, more desperate kind of distress that she had seen before in children who had been through something no child should ever have to experience. Before the appetizers even arrived, it started. A soft whimper from the little girl, Stella, that quickly escalated into full, breathless, heart-rending screams. Her brother Leo joined in seconds later, his small face flushing red, his chest heaving with sobs that shook his entire tiny body. The sound was piercing and raw in a way that cut through the polished atmosphere of the restaurant like a blade through silk. Matteo's jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. His massive scarred hands awkwardly patted Stella's back, completely unsuited for the gentle task required. His bodyguards stood around uselessly, hands hovering near their holsters as if they could shoot the concept of crying. The entire restaurant was staring. Wealthy patrons whispered behind their menus. The great Matteo Bianca paralyzed by 2 toddlers. Sophia was watching from the service station. Her manager was saying something to her right now, she could hear his voice, but she was not processing any of it. She was watching those children. And she knew with absolute certainty that what those kids needed in that moment was not a nanny or a bodyguard or an expensive child psychologist. They needed someone to get down on their level and tell them the world was not ending. She moved before she could talk herself out of it. She stepped past Silas, the enormous bodyguard who shot her a glare that could strip paint, and she knelt right beside Matteo's table. The man himself turned those dark, dangerous eyes on her immediately, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing down on her chest. "What do you think you are doing?" he said quietly. Quietly was somehow worse than loudly. His voice was low and controlled and full of the very specific kind of threat that comes from someone who has never needed to raise their voice to get a result. Sophia looked at him steadily. "They are not throwing a fit, Mr. Bianca," she said, keeping her own voice soft and even. "They are overstimulated. The lights, the clinking glass, the tension in this room. They are terrified." And then, without waiting for his permission, without even looking at him again, she reached into her apron and pulled out 2 plain unscented cloth napkins. She folded them quickly and expertly into the shapes of little birds, a trick her father had taught her when she was small. She lowered herself completely to the children's eye level, ignoring the Mafia boss beside her entirely, and she said softly, "Hey Leo, hey Stella, look what I made." She began to hum an old Appalachian folk lullaby her father used to sing, low and melodic and completely out of place in this restaurant. She handed them the cloth birds. She kept her eyes gentle and her voice steady, and she did not stop humming. The screaming hitched. Stella blinked through her tears at the cloth bird. Leo took a shaky, wet breath and reached out and grabbed the napkin from Sophia's hand. Within 2 minutes, the room had gone from chaos to soft, exhausted hiccups. Sophia gently wiped Stella's cheeks with her thumb and gave them both a warm, reassuring smile. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned around to find Matteo Bianca staring at her with an expression she could not read at all. He had paid for the most expensive nannies in the state. He had brought in child psychologists and pediatricians and specialists of every kind. Not one of them had been able to stop the twins' daily crying spells, not in 3 months. This girl in a stained apron had done it in 120 seconds. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sophia. Sophia Reynolds." He reached into his jacket and produced a platinum money clip, but he did not offer her cash. He handed her a single card with 1 phone number on it. "My children have not stopped crying for 3 months," he said. "You start tomorrow morning. Living nanny and maid. I will pay off whatever debts you have, and your salary will be 10 times what you make carrying trays." Sophia looked at the card. She looked at the man offering it. She knew exactly who he was. She knew the risks. She also knew she was 1 missed mortgage payment away from losing her father's house. "I will be there at 8, she said. The Bianca estate was 40 acres of heavily wooded land in Lake Forest, surrounded by wrought iron gates, security cameras, and men in dark suits with guard dogs patrolling the perimeter. To anyone on the outside looking in, it was an impenetrable fortress. To Sophia, rolling her single suitcase through the grand oak doors, it felt like a very beautiful, very gilded cage. She was greeted by Mrs. Gable, the stern gray-haired head housekeeper who looked at Sophia the way someone looks at a particularly unimpressive piece of furniture. "You are the waitress," Mrs. Gable said, by way of introduction. "Mr. Bianca has given you the suite next to the nursery. Your duties are strictly to care for Leo and Stella. You do not ask questions. You do not wander into the East Wing. And you never speak of what happens in this house to anyone outside of it. Understood?" Sophia said she understood, and followed the woman up the grand sweeping staircase, her eyes moving over the dark mahogany walls lined with expensive, melancholic paintings. The house felt suffocating. There was no warmth, no color, only the oppressive weight of old wealth and very old danger. The first weeks were brutal. The twins were deeply traumatized. Sophia pieced together the story from the hushed whispers of the kitchen staff. 3 months earlier, the children's mother, a beautiful woman named Victoria, had been killed in a car explosion. The bomb had been meant for Matteo. The children had been in the car directly behind hers. They had witnessed the blast. Every single night, like clockwork, the night terrors came. Leo would wake up screaming, fighting off invisible flames. Stella would crawl under her bed and cry until she could not breathe. Sophia stopped sleeping properly. She curled up on the rug between their beds, held their small hands, and sang the same Appalachian lullaby until her voice gave out. She woke up stiff and exhausted every morning and did it all over again. During the days, she threw open the heavy velvet curtains and let sunlight flood the gloomy nursery. She brought in finger paints. She built forts out of silk sheets. She read stories in funny voices. She sat on the floor with them for hours, giving them space to feel safe at their own pace, never rushing, never forcing. And slowly, painstakingly, she began to coax the light back into those 2 small haunted sets of eyes. Matteo watched from the shadows. He was a ghost in his own home, usually locked in his study, running his empire from behind heavy closed doors. But Sophia noticed him standing in the nursery doorway sometimes, watching his children with an expression that was equal parts profound love and agonizing, unbearable guilt. Whenever she tried to encourage him to come in, to sit with them, to just be present, he would turn and walk away, as if he genuinely believed his own presence was a contaminant, that the violence clinging to his life would somehow reach them through proximity alone. And then there was Dante. Matteo's younger brother was the underboss of the family, and he was notoriously unpredictable in the specific way that makes everyone in a room quietly track the nearest exit whenever he enters. He was charming on the surface, smooth and well-dressed and full of easy laughter at family dinners. But Sophia started noticing things. The way Dante smiled disappeared the instant Matteo looked away, replaced by a cold, calculating stare directed straight at the twins. The way Stella would go rigid and start shaking whenever her uncle walked into a room. The way Leo would go completely mute, staring at Dante with an intensity that sent a chill straight down Sophia's spine every time she saw it. She heard Dante and Matteo arguing through a slightly open study door one afternoon. "She is getting too comfortable," Dante was saying, his voice smooth and venomous. "She is a civilian, a liability. Victoria would not have wanted some peasant raising her kids." And Matteo's voice dropped to something that was barely a sound but somehow filled the entire hallway. "Do not speak her name." Sophia hurried back upstairs, her heart hammering. The children were not just traumatized by the explosion. They were terrified of someone specific. Someone who still walked through their home freely. And Sophia was beginning to understand exactly who that someone was. 2 months into her time at the estate, something shifted between her and Matteo. He started appearing at mealtimes, sitting awkwardly at the small children's table, his enormous frame hunched over a plate of macaroni and cheese, doing his best to engage with his kids through the enormous invisible wall of grief and guilt that surrounded him. Sophia watched him try. She watched him fail and try again. And she started to see, beneath the cold and the danger and the lethal reputation, a man desperately trying to piece his shattered family back together one tiny moment at a time. Late one night, after a particularly violent nightmare had left Stella sobbing in his arms, the two of them sat in the dimly lit hallway outside the nursery. Matteo looked utterly defeated. His tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned, his eyes hollow with an exhaustion that went far beyond sleep deprivation. "I can protect them from rival families," he said quietly, staring at his hands. "I can buy politicians and judges. But I cannot protect them from their own minds. I do not know how to fix this, Sophia." She placed a gentle hand on his arm, ignoring every instinct telling her this was dangerous. "You are doing it," she said. "They just need to know they are safe. They need to know the monster that took their mother is gone." He went completely still under her touch. His muscles turned to granite. "The monster is never gone, Sophia," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "In my world, monsters do not hide under the bed. They sit at the dinner table." He stood up abruptly and walked away before she could ask what that meant, leaving her sitting in the hallway with a cold, creeping dread settling into her bones. She did not have to wonder for long. A week later, Mrs. Gable was out on errands, and Sophia was asked to retrieve a specific blanket from storage in the forbidden East Wing. She found the storage room easily and pulled the blanket from a cedar chest. As she moved the fabric, a false bottom in the chest shifted. She paused. She should not have looked. She knew she should not have looked. She looked anyway. Beneath the panel was a small collection of Victoria's personal items. A diary, a set of keys, and a silver music box. Sophia picked up the music box and wound the key carefully. The lid popped open and a haunting, tinkling melody filled the quiet, dusty room. A gasp came from the doorway. She spun around. 5-year-old Leo was standing there. He had wandered out of the nursery to find her. His eyes were fixed on the music box, his face completely drained of color. He did not cry this time. He dropped to his knees and clapped both hands over his ears and let out a high, reedy scream of absolute, primal terror. Sophia dropped the box. It hit the hardwood floor and shattered. She rushed to gather Leo into her arms, holding him tight, trying to slow his violent trembling. "Leo, sweetheart," she said, her voice shaking. "It is just a music box." "No," he sobbed, pressing his face into her neck. "It is the bad man's music. The bad man who hurt Mommy." The room seemed to tilt. Sophia held the child and stared at the broken silver box on the floor. A bomb did not play a lullaby. A bomb did not have a face that a 5-year-old could point to and call the bad man. She reached out with trembling fingers and turned over the broken lid. Engraved on the inside, previously hidden by the mechanism, were 2 initials. DB. Dante Bianca. The full weight of it crashed into her like a freight train. Victoria had not been killed in a random crossfire or a hit gone wrong. She had been murdered deliberately by Matteo's own brother, who then continued walking through the halls of this house every week, pouring wine at the dinner table, calling himself a grieving uncle. And these children had seen him. They were old enough to recognize him. But they were too young and too terrified and too traumatized to articulate the truth to the one person who could do something about it. They had been carrying this alone for 3 months. 2 5-year-olds, alone with the knowledge of who killed their mother, forced to sit near him at Sunday dinners while their father had no idea. Sophia held Leo tightly and made him a quiet, fierce promise that she intended to keep with everything she had. But she was in an impossible position. If she went to Matteo with nothing but a broken music box and the word of a traumatized 5-year-old, Dante would simply deny everything. In the Mafia, blood was everything, and a maid's word meant absolutely nothing against a blood relative and underboss. She needed proof. She needed something concrete. And she needed to find it before Dante realized she was looking. For the next 2 weeks, she carried the secret like a stone in her chest. She watched Dante at the Sunday dinners with new eyes, cataloging every micro-expression, every calculated gesture. She noticed the way his smile vanished and that cold, flat stare returned the moment Matteo's attention shifted. At one dinner, Dante casually reached across the table to hand Stella a bread roll, and his heavy silver cufflink clinked against her plate. Stella flinched so violently she knocked over her water glass and scrambled off her chair to hide under the tablecloth, sobbing. Dante sighed and said, "What is wrong with these children? They are broken, you coddle them too much." And Sophia, who was on her knees pulling Stella into her arms, had to use every single ounce of self-control she possessed not to say what she was thinking out loud. One night she was in the kitchen, too wound up to sleep, hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea that had gone cold, when a deep, quiet voice broke the silence. Matteo was standing in the hallway doorway, dressed down in dark slacks and a black cashmere sweater, looking exhausted and somehow still devastating. He poured himself a bourbon and leaned against the marble counter and looked at her with those dark, perceptive eyes. "You are afraid of something," he said. "I see it in the way you watch the doors. The way you tense when people walk in. If someone in my crew is disrespecting you, you tell me. Your brother murdered your wife," her mind screamed. The words were right there, pressing against the back of her teeth. But if she said them now and Dante found out before Matteo could act, those children were in danger. She forced a small, steady smile. "It is just the environment," she said. "The guns, the security. I'm not used to it." He studied her face for a long, agonizing moment. He did not believe her. She could tell. He reached out, his rough calloused fingers gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and the touch was so unexpectedly tender it nearly undid her entirely. "I will not let anything in this house hurt you, Sophia," he said. "Or my children. I swear it on my life." She slipped back into the east wing the following afternoon while Matteo was away and the children were occupied. She went straight to Victoria's old study, which had been preserved exactly as it was, still smelling faintly of jasmine and dust. She searched methodically, running her hands under desk drawers, feeling along the backs of shelves, checking for false panels. An hour in, she noticed a slight tear in the silk lining of the vanity stool. She reached inside the padding and pulled out a small leather-bound diary. The early pages were mundane. Notes about the children, household observations, little memories. But the final entries, written in the days just before Victoria died, were frantic and barely legible. September 12th. He knows. Dante knows I saw the offshore accounts. He is siphoning millions from the family's casino revenues to fund a rogue faction. He wants Matteo gone. He wants the seat. I have to tell Matteo. But Dante threatened the children today. He whispered to Leo that if I speak, the monsters will come in the dark. Sophia clamped a hand over her mouth. Here it was. The motive. The proof. Dante had not just murdered his brother's wife out of some twisted jealousy or family rivalry. He was staging a full coup. He had been bleeding the family's money into his own private operation and Victoria had found the evidence. She was a loose end he could not afford. And the children were collateral he had deliberately traumatized into silence. Reading is a dangerous pastime for the help. She spun around so fast she dropped the diary. It hit the carpet with a soft thud. Dante was standing in the doorway, the lock clicking shut behind him with a sound that seemed to echo through the room. He was peeling off his leather driving gloves slowly and deliberately. He looked nothing like the charming uncle right now. He looked like what he was. A predator who had finally cornered his prey. He confirmed everything calmly and without remorse, the way someone talks about a business decision they made years ago that turned out well for them. Victoria was a liability. She was turning Matteo soft. He was the future of the Bianca family. and Sophia had until midnight to pack her bags and disappear. He gripped her jaw with enough force to bruise, and he told her exactly what would happen if she chose not to run. He would slit Matteo's throat while he slept. And then he would take Leo and Stella for a very long and very fatal drive in the country. He picked up Victoria's diary, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and stepped over her as she stumbled to the floor. "Run, Sophia," he said at the door. "Or die with them." The moment the door closed, she scrambled to her feet. For about 4 seconds, pure terror tried to take over. She let it. And then she pushed it down hard because underneath the terror was something stronger. She was not leaving. If she ran, Dante would eventually kill Matteo anyway and take those children, and there would be no one left who knew what she knew. She had to warn Matteo. She had to get the children out. And she had to do both before midnight at a crowded, chaotic syndicate gala that was about to fill the mansion's ground floor with hundreds of the most dangerous men in the city. She raced to the nursery. She packed a bag for the twins quietly and quickly, stuffing in clothes and toys and the cash she had saved, and she knelt down in front of Leo and Stella and told them they were going to play the best stealth game of their lives. Like little mice. They had to be completely silent. Stella's eyes filled with tears and she asked, "Is Daddy coming?" Sophia's heart broke clean in half. "I have to talk to Daddy first," she said. "But I need you to be so brave for me right now." By 8 that evening the mansion was transformed. Orchestra music thumped through the walls. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns packed every corridor. Sophia moved through the service passages in her black maid's uniform, heading for Matteo. She spotted him near the grand staircase, devastatingly composed in his tailored black tuxedo, speaking to 2 rival underbosses. She stepped out of the servants' hallway and made it exactly 3 steps before an iron grip closed around her arm and yanked her backward. It was not Dante. It was Silas. Matteo's own head of security. "Mr. Dante is looking for you," Silas said flatly. "He told me to escort you out permanently." Sophia's blood went ice cold. Dante had not just threatened her. He had already flipped Matteo's most trusted guard. The rot went deeper than she had imagined. Silas dragged her through the back corridors, down the servants' stairs, into the subterranean wine cellar. The music from above vibrated through the floorboards, swallowing every sound of her struggle. He pulled out a suppressed pistol. "Dante wants this quiet," he said. "Make it easy on yourself." Sophia dropped to her knees. Not in surrender. Her hand closed around the jagged neck of a wine bottle that had fallen and shattered against the stone floor. She thought of Leo's eyes. She thought of Stella's laugh. She thought of Matteo standing upstairs, completely unaware. She lunged upward with a sound she did not recognize as coming from her own body and drove the broken glass into Silas's thigh. He roared and the gun discharged wildly, shattering a row of bottles above them. Sophia grabbed an oak stool and swung it with everything she had. It connected solidly with his jaw and he went down hard and did not get up. She grabbed the dropped gun, sprinted back up the stairs and ran. She reached the nursery and the door was open. The beds were empty. The duffel bag was gone. And Dante's voice came from the connecting suite, smooth and satisfied as if he had been waiting. Behind him, on the vast king-sized bed, were Leo and Stella, Dante's enforcer Rocco's hand heavy on Leo's small shoulder. Dante told her she was too late. That in exactly 3 minutes the explosive planted beneath the main stage in the ballroom would detonate. Matteo and half the syndicate's bosses would be gone. Dante would be upstairs, comforting his newly orphaned niece and nephew. A perfect tragedy. Sophia raised the gun with shaking hands and locked eyes with him and told him to let them go. Dante laughed and said she would not pull the trigger. He was probably right. She was trembling. Her whole body was shaking. "Don't bet on it." The temperature in the room plummeted. A low, thunderous voice came from the hallway. Matteo stood in the doorway, tuxedo jacket gone, a smoking gun in his fist, and an expression on his face that made the air itself seem to stop moving. Rocco spun for his weapon and went down with a single clean shot before he got to it. Behind Matteo stood Mrs. Gable, clutching a heavy iron fireplace poker with both hands, her gray hair escaping its bun, her chin held high. "You underestimate the loyalty of my staff, brother," Matteo said, stepping over Rocco. Mrs. Gable noticed Silas dragging Sophia away. "She came to find me." Dante's arrogant composure shattered into panic. He reached for his shoulder holster and Matteo crossed the room in 3 strides and hit him with a force that sent him crashing through a glass coffee table. "Daddy!" Stella screamed. Sophia dropped her gun, rushed forward, caught both children in her arms, and shielded their faces as Matteo hauled his brother up by the lapels and pressed him against the wall. "Is it true?" Matteo whispered, his voice shaking with a rage so deep it seemed to vibrate the walls around them. "Did you touch my wife?" Dante spat blood and smiled his twisted, defiant smile and said that Victoria had been turning Matteo soft, that she had found the offshore accounts, that he had done what had to be done for the family. Check his left breast pocket, Sophia called from the doorway, holding the twins tight. Victoria's diary. It has the bomb codes. Matteo ripped the jacket open and pulled out the leather book. He looked at his late wife's handwriting for only a moment before ordering his men to sweep the ballroom and call in the private disposal team. Dante was taken to a warehouse. The official story given to the press was a ruptured gas line. The men in tactical gear combing the ballroom were not plumbers. Sophia sat on the tailgate of a private ambulance near the rose garden, a silver thermal blanket around her shoulders, Stella asleep against her neck, Leo sitting beside her gripping her apron with both hands. The frantic, hunted look was gone from the little boy's eyes. He watched the chaos around his home with a calm that felt like the first exhale after months of holding breath. Matteo emerged from the crowd of suited men and emergency personnel and crossed the wet grass toward them in long, urgent strides. "Are they hurt?" he asked, his voice a rough rasp, stopping in front of her as if he was afraid to come too close. "They are fine," she said softly. Stella passed out from exhaustion. Leo has been quiet. But they know, Matteo. They know the bad man is gone. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he reached out and gripped her shoulders over the foil blanket, his hands large and warm and trembling slightly. "The bomb was packed with enough C4 to level the east wing," he said quietly. "If you had not fought Silas, if you had not come upstairs when you did, we would all be gone, Sophia. You saved my entire family." Sophia looked down at the blood on her apron and felt the full weight of what she had done settle over her. Mrs. Gable stepped out of the shadows behind Matteo and looked at Sophia with eyes that held something the housekeeper had never directed at her before. "Respect. I have served the Bianca family for 40 years, Mrs. Gable said, her chin high. "I have seen powerful men freeze in the face of death. You did not freeze, Miss Reynolds. You belong in this house as much as anyone with the Bianca name." The 3 weeks that followed were a quiet miracle. Matteo dismantled the rot in his organization with swift and thorough precision. The underworld called it the night of the red wine and spoke of it in hushed, frightened tones. Dante, Silas, and Rocco simply ceased to exist. Officially, Dante had relocated to Europe. Within the syndicate, the message was unmistakable. A pediatric trauma specialist named Dr. Meline Hayes began working with the twins every afternoon and noted within her first week that Sophia was the anchor keeping the children grounded. Stella's laughter started echoing through the hallways daily. Leo began speaking in full sentences again, demanding bedtime stories about dragons and knights. And then one rainy Tuesday evening, Sophia sat in her suite staring at an empty suitcase on her bed. Her debts were gone. The mortgage on her father's house was cleared. She had a bank account that looked nothing like the one she had arrived with. She was technically free. She could walk out of those iron gates and go anywhere and never have to wonder if the man she was falling in love with was going to come home with blood on his hands. She was staring at the suitcase when the door opened. Matteo stood there, dressed casually in dark slacks and a black cashmere sweater, looking exhausted and undeniably beautiful and entirely undone by the sight of that open suitcase. "Are you packing?" he said in the quiet voice of a man watching his lifeline slip away. Sophia told him the truth. That she did not know her place here anymore. That she was not a maid, not a nanny, just a civilian living inside a fortress. He closed the door. He crossed the room slowly. He told her what he had done that day. He had sat in a boardroom with 5 of the most ruthless men in the country and told them the Bianca family was going legitimate. Liquidating the illegal casinos. Stepping away from the docks. Redirecting capital into real estate and tech infrastructure. Sophia stared at him. "The other families will come for you," she said. "They will see it as weakness." "Let them try," he said, and the dangerous flash in his eyes softened immediately. He told her he had lived in the dark his entire life. He had thought the blood and the violence were just the cost of survival. Until he watched a girl in a stained apron sit on a restaurant floor and fold cloth birds and hum a lullaby to his screaming children, and face down a loaded gun for blood that was not even hers. He reached out and took her hands and pulled her away from the suitcase. "You are the light that pierced through the darkest corners of this house," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "I am tearing my empire apart and rebuilding it in the light because I cannot ask a woman like you to live in the shadows." He reached into his pocket and pressed a small, beautifully carved wooden key into her palm. A vineyard in Tuscany. In her name. Whether she went alone or whether she let him and the twins come with her. The choice was hers entirely. Sophia looked at the key in her palm for a long moment. Then she set it on the bed, reached up, tangled her hands in his hair, and pulled him down to her. The kiss held months of terror and longing and desperate relief in something that felt, for the first time in both of their lives, like solid ground. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered against his lips. "Not to Tuscany, not anywhere. Chicago is our home. We stay and we fight and we build something better here. Together." And Matteo Bianca, who had run a criminal empire for 15 years without flinching, buried his face in the crook of her neck and made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and for the first time in 35 years felt something that had no name in the language of power and violence. There was peace. 6 months later, November wind off Lake Michigan rattled the estate's massive windows, but inside the grand dining room, the atmosphere was nothing like it had ever been before. The table was loud and warm and chaotic in the best possible way. Mrs. Gable was directing kitchen staff with a soft smile that had become a permanent feature on her face. Dr. Hayes was laughing loudly at a joke from Vincent, the aging consigliere, who had unexpectedly and delightfully developed a crush on the brilliant therapist. Matteo sat at the head of the table, carving a roasted turkey while Stella sat in his lap trying to steal crispy pieces before they reached the plates. His eyes were warm, alive. His deep laugh echoed off the mahogany walls and filled every corner of the room. Sophia sat to his immediate right, the seat once occupied by a traitor, now claimed by the queen of the family. Leo was beside her, intensely drawing a turkey on his paper placemat. He held it up with 2 hands. "Look, Mama." He had started calling her Mama 2 months ago, and it had sent Sophia directly to the bathroom to cry happy tears for a solid hour. "It is beautiful, sweetheart," she said and ruffled his dark hair. Matteo set down his carving knife and wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. The diamond ring on her left hand, an emerald-cut stone that had belonged to his grandmother, caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. "Are you happy, Mrs. Bianca?" he murmured softly, his lips brushing her ear. Sophia looked around the table. At Mrs. Gable and Vincent and Dr. Hayes. At Leo with his paper turkey. At Stella stealing turkey skin off her father's plate with absolute zero remorse. At the man beside her who had torn down his entire world to build her a different one. "I have everything I ever wanted, Matteo," she said and leaned in and kissed him. "Absolutely everything. From a struggling waitress drowning in debt, to the fierce, unshakable heart of a family that had almost destroyed itself from the inside out." Sophia Reynolds never set out to infiltrate a mafia empire. She just knelt down beside 2 crying children and chose to stay. And that choice changed everything. The shadows of the past had finally been replaced by something that could not be dimmed or bought or threatened into silence. A love that was fierce and flawed and beautifully, completely real. The Bianca family was unbroken. And as laughter and clinking glasses and the sound of a 5-year-old demanding more turkey filled the room, Sophia knew with every part of her soul that this was not the end of a nightmare. This was the very first page of something magnificent. And that is where we leave them at Real Life Echo. If this story gave you chills, if Sophia's courage made you want to stand up and cheer, if the moment Leo called her mama hit you right in the chest the way it hit us, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us your favorite moment from today's story. Was it Sophia in the wine cellar with a broken bottle and nothing to lose? Was it the look on Matteo's face when he realized what his brother had done? Was it the wooden key in the vineyard and the most unexpected proposal in the history of mafia romance? Tell us. We genuinely read every single comment and we love hearing which moments stay with you. If you shared this story with someone today, that means the world to us and it helps more people find Real Life Echo, so thank you from the bottom of our hearts. If you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because next time we have a story that is going to absolutely wreck you in the best possible way. We will see you there.